We're starting a new sermon series today. I've entitled it Old Words for a New Way. I'm hoping to have a conversation this fall that will take us through Advent this year about the way we want to be in the world as people, as individuals, as community of faith. What way do we want to go? And what I thought we could do is there's an author that I really like. She's passed on to glory now. Her name was Phyllis Tickle. And she had a book called The Great Emergence. And in that she said around every 500 years or so, the church has a rummage sale. It goes into the basement, goes into the attic, and it drags everything out onto the front lawn, sort of puts it on the front lawn, and then it decides what it wants to bring back into the house to use. And some stuff gets repurposed, some stuff gets discarded, but that we are in one of those periods. And she maps it through history, that if you go back 500 years, it was the Protestant Reformation. Before that was the Great Schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and what became Roman Catholicism. Before that was, the creedal Constantinian sort of formulation of that. And before that, obviously, was the axial turning from which we get our Gospels of Jesus. Every 500 years, and we happen to be in one of those periods. So I want to have a conversation about if we're in one of those periods, what if we went into the church basement or into the attic and we dusted off some ideas and said, do we want to keep this? We haven't used it in a long time. Is this worth keeping around? And if so, where would we use it? That's what I'm hoping to do with this series. It's called Old Words for a New Way. Today, I want to talk about life. I want to do some words of life to get us started. In John 3:16, famously, especially if you've ever seen a sporting event where people are holding up signs that say John 3:16, says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believed in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." John 14:6, Jesus, in answering his disciples, says, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And those are two passages I'm hoping that we can talk about today. We need to start in a different place, though, because you and I live in a time where there is a very popular impulse. It's sort of part of our cultural attitude, where there is a desire or a convenience or a compulsion, if you will, to reduce things down to their simplest form or the easiest answer in order to make things sort of accessible or understandable. And this reductive move, I think, is really limiting. I really do think that it kills our imagination and takes away so much of the joy and the vibrant part of life. I'll give you a couple examples. There's a thinker, historian, and he's famous. His name is Arnold Toynbee. He's famous for saying that history, the way we teach it, he's critiquing the way that history gets taught to us. He says that history is just one damn thing after another. And what he's critiquing is that we have reduced history down to just wars and great men. And in that simplicity, the way we teach history, we lose so much of the nuance and the texture and the vibrancy of the era that gave birth to these moments that we study. But let's be honest, history is far more than that, right? It's a funny line, and you have to give them credit for that, but it's not accurate. People do the same thing with love. Once in a while, somebody who's really bought into science or evidentialism, right? Scientism, something like that. Anytime you hear somebody use the phrase, "nothing but," be careful, because you might be dealing with an over-reduction. Like, for instance, somebody will say, "love is nothing but," or "nothing more." Those are like the key words you have to listen for. It's just neurons firing in your brain that spark emotions, adrenaline, hormones, and pheromones, and right? It's all chemistry. It's just biology. And I just want to say, I think love's more than that. I'm not saying it's not those things. I think it does make the synapses in your brain fire. I think it does cause hormones and pheromones and endorphins, and right, I think all that is true. But love, it can't be reduced to chemistry, right? There's something unappealing or unsatisfying in this reductive move. Sometimes people do it with Christmas. They'll say Christmas is just a commercialized, former bastardized religious holiday. And I think, lighten up. Come on, Scrooge, lighten up. Christmas is it commercialized? For sure. I mean, the fact that it starts before Thanksgiving, it makes me a little nervous. By the way, I noticed that here, I'm guessing in southern Idaho, Halloween's a big deal because the decorations came up before Labor Day. So that was like a first clue to me that Halloween may be a big deal around here. Anyway, people try and do this with Christmas, and I want to say, no. You don't get distracted by the flashy lights and the glitter and the tinsel. Christmas is about so much more. And this reductive move, it's not only unsatisfying, it's limiting. This has happened, by the way, in Christianity. Because when we really look at what Jesus is talking about, Jesus isn't talking about only life after death. That's sort of a tragic thing that has happened, that the fixation of many people's Christianity has become what happens after they die, right? It's, do I go to heaven after I die? And they miss, and it's easy to do, by the way, in English, but they miss what Jesus is both inviting us into and promising us. So I want to talk about what Jesus was talking about. This phrase, eternal life, is actually a really interesting phrase because in the original language, it should really be translated the life of the ages. That's what Jesus is talking about. A life of goodness, connection with the divine, of purpose, of joy, a virtuous life that all the ages have looked for. Eternal life is the life of the ages. By the way, the word is aeonic, so A-E-O-N, aeon. It's a word we don't have in English. The closest thing we have is an eon, which is like an undefined period of time that goes on, right? It's the closest thing we have. But what Jesus is talking about is an aeonic life, the life that everyone from every age has been looking for. That's one way to say it. Or a life that lasts through the ages, an aeonic life. The tragic thing is that life that Jesus is calling us to and promising us, it gets translated eternal life, which isn't bad, it's just not as good, but eternal life, okay, a life that lasts into eternity, that's still pretty good. But here's where the switch happens. So you go 1 degree over from the aeonic life, the life of the ages, and you go to eternal life in English, and it's not quite as good, but we'll take it. And then it gets moved over 1 more degree to life after death. Do you go to heaven after you die? So this is tragic to me because what I don't want you to hear me say is that people don't go to heaven after they die or that there's not eternal life. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that going to heaven after you die is a byproduct, not the goal. The goal is a life worth living. A life that carries you into eternity. A life that all the ages, those who have come before and those who will come after, a life that they would desire. A life of harmony and joy and healing and wholeness and goodness and virtue. A life of the ages. Now, that life is eternal life. and is life after you die. It's just that going to heaven after you die is such a small goal compared to what Jesus both calls us to and promises us. The life of the ages is something that we get called up into. It is the life of God. It is the divine existence. It is the life of the Godhead. And you and I get invited to live up into that with our story here on earth, to participate in the divine while we're still here. Some of you probably know this, but many of you may not. Muhammad Ali, well known for being a boxer, was also a poet. How many of you knew that? Oh, a couple of you. He had a celebrated book of poetry, and my father's favorite poem comes from that book. It's a really short poem, and this is my dad's favorite poem. I don't want pie in the sky in the by and by. I want something sound on the ground while I'm around. That's my dad's favorite poem. By the way, today is Grandparents' Day. I don't know if any of you are doing anything to celebrate, but if you are a grandparent here, I want to say both congratulations and thank you. Happy Grandparents' Day. That, by the way, is part of this aeonic life, the life of the ages. For those who have come before, right? Because we inherit our grandmother's gardens, right, as the saying goes. And we pass on the legacy to our children and grandchildren as we partner together as aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters. That is part of the aeonic life. Why did I think, when I was putting together this series, why did I think it was important that we start with this word, an old word, to talk about a new way? Because, and I will be honest with you, I am both annoyed and unsatisfied with what seem to be the two primary options that are offered to you and I today when it comes to this life. I'm both annoyed and unsatisfied because, and we've been practicing this summer, every Sunday we practice saying, well, what are the guardrails on each side of the road that we want to avoid so that we can keep moving forward, right? So what are the guardrails on each side of the road? And when it comes to this life that we are called to, what's the point, the purpose of life? It seems to me that we have two really, not bad options, but unsatisfying options. On one hand, we have grievance politics and conflict culture and war and aggression and striving after things that don't satisfy and consumerism that ultimately consumes us. Like, just watch the news. This thing that's offered us, it's not really a good life, right? This chasing after things that don't satisfy, being in conflict with those who you disagree with, arming yourself to the teeth, invading foreign countries. Like, this thing is more Rome than Christian. That's more of a Roman mentality than anything we find in Jesus' teaching. And it just seems unsatisfying to me that that's the primary thing that's presented to us. Like, if you watch the evening news, just ask yourself, like, is this all that life has to offer? You think, my God, I hope not. But on the other hand, the other primary option that I hear presented is do whatever's best for you, follow your heart, be true to yourself. And it's that kind of a limp liberalism focused on the individual that you think, I'm not sure that's what Jesus was talking about. I'm not sure that that's what we were being invited to live up into. I don't think that this sort of moral free-for-all, chaotic culture of everybody do what's best for yourself and follow your own heart, and that kind of limp liberalism, focus on individualism, it's certainly not the gospel. I'm pretty sure it's not the kingdom. I'm really sure that it's not what Jesus was talking to when he called us and invited us into eternal life, the life of the ages. It has to be about something more than that. It has to be about something bigger than that. So what's the way forward? In the series, in the months that come, the next 12 weeks, I want to continue a journey and a conversation as a community where I'll bring up from the basement some old ideas or concepts or vocabulary words, and I'm going to set them in front of you. And then I want to have a conversation to say, is this valuable? Like as a family heritage, is this something we want to keep around? And if so, how would we use it? Would it go in the front room so that that's what we present to those who come in, right? Do we put it out in the front yard and offer it for free because we don't value it anymore? Do we keep it in the garage and bring it out once a year, right, when it's appropriate? Or do we want to put it on the kitchen table and use it every day? And I don't know how the conversation's going to go. I don't know what conclusion we will ultimately come to as a community. But I do know this. There is a way forward in 2023 where people like you and I, in a community like this, can live in such a way that we bring out the best in each other and we make the world a better place by serving in love. So I do know that if nothing else, there is a way forward. There's a way to be in the world. Now, I'm suspicious that what Jesus has both called us to and promised us is enough better than that we may not have even scratched the surface of understanding what the life of the ages that's available to us holds. Because if we have been sold some version of eternal life, which somehow became life after death, you go to heaven after you die, we may have been so focused on the destination that we haven't really been a part of the process by which that byproduct comes about. The byproduct is fine, but it's not the goal. The goal is to live in such a way that you are not only the truest version of yourself as an individual, but in community, your strengths make us stronger, and our grace covers over each of our weaknesses so that we are all better than we would be on our own. And together, we begin to experience an aeonic life. We get a foretaste of a great banquet that is promised us of goodness and peace and restoration and wholeness and health, connection, repair of the world, the tikkun olam, God's vision for how things should be. So I hope that you will come back and participate in this conversation any Sunday that you are around and that your football team is not on TV. We will be having this conversation every Sunday morning and during the week, online and sometimes in person. I'm glad that you are here, and I hope that you will be a part of this as we figure out together, how do we want to be in the world? I thought it was important to start with the fact that we are rich. We have inherited a fortune of goodness that we have barely begun to dip into. And that what Christ promises us and calls us to is a life that all of the ages, from generations and centuries ago and the generations that will come, in a life that the ages have been looking for. And that is what I want to explore together. I'm going to ask Brenda if she will play us some music and give you some time to reflect, and then we're going to talk together.